Hello, it's Mr. Murphy. You know me. You won't be seeing this unless you do. This is like the first test at trying to record my thoughts as I go through the evolution packet, because I see some of you through your answers, and some of you have vocalized on Discord. That is a little bit challenging to go through some of the packet. So I felt like I can just sort of do this with you, or at least do this on my own, and then you can start and stop this video, and hopefully it helps you to hear my voice as I'm reading this to you. So I'm going to share my screen in a second, and hopefully you can hear my voice okay and everything goes well. And then again, it's going to be really helpful for you to stop the video, to pause it, if I say something that doesn't really make sense to you, to rewind it, because maybe hearing it a couple times will be helpful. And I will hopefully get better with making these videos, both make more videos and also to make videos that are more helpful for you in the future, because again, this is the first time that I'm trying it. Okay, so here we go. Share screen, share. So you should be able to see my desktop here. All right, so I'm just going to read this to you. I'm going to zoom in a little bit and go through it. So page 1 starts with just the observation that life has so many similarities. Right? If you look at any living thing, right? When we look at any living thing, we find that every single one of them shares a ton of things. Even though a jellyfish and you look so different, we share a lot of things, even though you can't really see it on the outside. And here are those things, right? Here's the common characteristics that all life shares. So number 1 is they're made of cells. It doesn't matter if you're a banana tree or a human, you're made of cells. It doesn't matter if you are a wombat or if you are a fungus, like a mushroom, you're made of cells. All life is made of cells. The second thing is that all life has a genetic code and builds proteins using this genetic code. You're going to talk about that a lot more next year in Applied Science 2. The third thing that all life shares is that all life needs energy to perform chemical reactions, so they have a metabolism. Scrolling down here. With this energy, different living things get their food in different ways. We've talked about that before, right? Heterotrophs need to feed because they get their food, their energy from other sources. And then autotrophs, and they do photosynthesis. And I made sure to put these both in green because most of the time autotrophs are green, right? Like plants. Those things, they don't have to eat, they make their own food, right? So don't forget about what we're talking about here. We're talking about how all life shares certain things, and all life definitely needs energy. And although we get energy in different ways, sometimes all life needs energy. All life also has the ability to reproduce, meaning to make more cells and to make the next generation. And this basically just means that life gets to pass down their information, right? So all life has the ability to reproduce and to make babies, okay? The fifth thing that all life shares is that all life responds to its environment. It tries to sort of keep itself healthy, okay? We call that, trying to keep itself healthy, we call that homeostasis. That means like a balance. So all life responds to its environment to try and keep balance. I can show you a bunch of I'm on this big black laptop, so I can't really move it around nice around the room, but I can pull this up. This is an onion, and the onion is growing, it's like little leaves out of the roots, and these leaves will bend towards the light. They'll actually start to move towards the light because it's responding to its environment. Based on where the light is, it's going to respond to try and get more light so it can be more successful. So all life is similar, okay? So again, what does that tell us? Basically, we found all of these things that life shares in common. We say that all life does these things. So what does that actually mean? And I'll straight up read this. If every living thing has similar characteristics, it makes sense that billions of years ago, the first living things had these characteristics. And then they passed them down over time, right? If it's really important to respond to your environment, then those things that can respond to their environment, they are going to pass down that trait. And those things that can't respond to their environment, they're going to die. And so if they die, they can't pass down their traits because they're dead. They can't reproduce. So those organisms were so successful at staying alive, the ones that were staying alive the best, they survived better, and they passed down those good traits to their babies. And we, all the living things that exist today, we are the descendants of those things that lived billions of years ago and that were really successful. And these things didn't look like us. They were very different. They were just like bacteria. And this was way before humans and way before anything that you see and think of as a living thing. None of that existed back then. But there were things that existed that reproduced and that dealt with energy needs and that had a DNA code. So that stuff, that sort of basic stuff about the things that all life shares, that was there, that existed in those really ancient organisms. And they passed down their traits. And now every living thing we find has those traits. So what does that all mean? I know I said a lot, what does that all mean? That means that all life has these common characteristics, and that's evidence that we're all related. It doesn't matter if we're talking about an onion or if we're talking about something as complex as a human that has all these thoughts that have been able to design computers. It doesn't matter that we share a lot of differences. What matters for what we're talking about now is that we actually have a lot of things in common, even though we look so different and we act so different. Okay, so how do we answer this stuff, right? A big thing is that you got to make sure that you're highlighting these questions. And so it's going to be really important for you to go through them and to make sure you're highlighting the question word or phrase that tells you how to answer it. And then you type your answer in the box, right? So the first question says, provide one example of how you maintain homeostasis each day. And so that's not something that maybe we talked about a lot. So let's go back up. And we see this word homeostasis is here. And maybe I want to highlight it, you know, so that way it's a little bit easier for my eyes to grab and for me to figure out what it means, you know, to look back to it. So this is talking about, it's in parentheses here, responds to its environment, tries to maintain homeostasis when the outside environment changes to keep a stable, healthy internal environment. Okay, so homeostasis is when the outside changes, so the outside world changes, our inside bodies are trying to stay stable. And so a good example that I've told a couple of you about is like when we shiver or sweat. We try to maintain a good, healthy temperature inside, and we do so by responding to our environment. If it's too cold, we shiver and try to bring our temperature up. If it's too hot, we sweat and we bring our temperature down. So that way we're maintaining homeostasis. So that could be an answer that you would put in here to provide an example of how you maintain homeostasis each day. For the second question, it says identify one of the 5 common characteristics of life described above that you're least comfortable in explaining. And so that's going to be your own opinion, right? So you just have to go back up and look at these 5 common characteristics. I just wanted you to look at them again and try and think, okay, which one of these is most challenging for me? So that way I can get an idea about what I need to further explain to you, what I can give you a little comment for. And so what I really need you to do, well, I don't want to move that. What I want you to do, remember, is to highlight the question word or phrase that tells you how to answer it, right? So identify one of the 5 common characteristics of life. So this is what I want you to highlight here. Well, that's what I want you to highlight there. And then you can go through and do the same thing to the rest of these as you're answering them. It's really, really, really helpful to highlight the part of the question that helps you to answer it, because sometimes you have to go back and look at it. And a lot of times we answer questions and the answers don't really match what the question is asking. And that's something that I think a lot of us struggle with, me included. And so I think it's going to be really important for you to do that, for you to highlight those the important parts of the question. So let's go to the next one. Explain why it makes sense that you and a banana tree have a common ancestor. So what do you both have in common? I'm trying to help you by asking you this question afterward. So you and the banana tree have a common ancestor. So I told you up above, right, that all life shares common ancestors. All things are related. Right? The ancestors of all life lived billions of years ago, and their good genes and traits have been passed down. So what are those good traits that we got from those ancestors? Well, they're all here, all 5 of these things. So all life shares these things in common because we had common ancestors that responded to the environment and that were made of cells and that had a metabolism that dealt with energy needs, okay? Again, if I'm going too fast or if you want to replay something, hopefully it helps for you just to pause and to go back. All right, number 4 says, now that you know that you're related to banana trees and bacteria and jellyfish, how does it make you feel? Again, I really just sort of wanted to get you to start thinking about this, because this is something that is hard to think about, that we're related to something so different than us. And so I'm just curious where your mind is and how you're doing with the information. Okay, so that's your thoughts, your answer. Let's go to the second page. All right, so here's another observation, that most living things look very different. So when we look at living things, although there are similarities like the ones that we described above, although all life has cells and all life deals with energy and we have to get food in certain ways and all life shares those commonalities, but there are tons of differences. And you probably notice these differences a lot more, right? Super different, even though we're both living things. So even just organisms in the animal kingdom look different. And I give you a picture here of the 6 kingdoms of life. We talked about the kingdoms a little bit. You did your cells project where you chose a kingdom. And so we've got very different things here. So here's the big question, right? Why does all life look so different if we all have a lot of things in common? And here's the reasons why. Time and changing ecosystems. So first of all, there's been billions of years of time that has happened on Earth, right? Life has been evolving for 3.5 billion years, and that's a crazy long period of time, a longer period of time than you or I can ever possibly even really think about, because our lifespan is short compared to that. So 1,000 years is a long time, right? But 1 billion years is 1,000,000 times 1,000. So that's 1,000,000, 1,000 times. That's such a long period of time. So imagine how many new and different species could come about and then go extinct during that time. It's just a huge period of time. So the Earth has been around for a long time. That's what I'm trying to get you to understand. And then the second bit is that the Earth has had lots of these ecosystems that exist. We talked about what ecosystems are. The Earth has many different ecosystems. I'm reading here: jungles and swamps and deserts and mountains and rivers and lakes and coral reefs. And this is just a few of the big ones that we can name. The Earth's ecosystems are determined by abiotic factors. We learned that in ecology, remember, that the temperature and the rainfall and the sunlight, those are the things that determine if it's going to be a desert or if it's going to be a jungle. You know, the rainfall is so important there that, and the rainfall is non-living, right? And temperature is so important in determining what type of ecosystem it is, and temperature is abiotic. So the abiotic things, they really determine the fact that we've got these changing ecosystems, and the fact that we've got these changing ecosystems, that although jungles will stay there for a long period of time, over the billions of years, the ecosystems do change. Swamps dry up, and the earth is constantly moving, even though you don't feel it. And so the earth does change over time. And so there have been lots and lots and lots of species that have come about on Earth, but also gone extinct on Earth because of these changing ecosystems, right? I highlighted this point, so it's going to be important. I'm going to read it to you, right? As an ecosystem changes, living things in those ecosystems either survive using good traits, right? Good traits are called adaptations, or the organism dies because it doesn't have the adaptations to handle that change. And that's going to be a really, really valuable point here, that if one thing has a really good part of their body and another thing doesn't have that part that's really helpful, then that other thing, that second thing, is going to die. That first thing is going to survive because maybe it has good camouflage and it can blend in because it's got a beautiful brown color that blends into the mud. And if this guy is bright orange and it's not going to be able to blend in, it's going to die, and it's not going to pass on its genes to the next generation. So this is the second bit there, and I already sort of just touched on it. The organisms that don't have enough successful traits, they die off, right? Those bright orange colored bugs or whatever, you know, they're going to die off if those orange colorations are bad for it. You know, sometimes it could be good, but in this case, we're saying that it's not a good trait, and so that's going to end up killing off those organisms more than the brown ones. The brown ones are going to survive more, and then the brown ones, right, they're going to survive more, and they're going to pass on those good traits to the next generation. So the next generation is going to end up more brown. So right now, scientists have discovered about 1.7 million different species of life on Earth. With so much time and so many different ecosystems on Earth, it makes sense that the Earth would end up with lots of different species. Although all species share similar traits, each species has traits passed down to them from their ancestors that give them their own special abilities, right? So each species is different. We know that. We know that like a plant is different than us. And a plant has had traits that have been passed down to it to make it more successful, right? We don't bend towards the light. We can't, you know, I can't cut my, you know, leg off and have it grow sprouts like this. This is something that's really beneficial for this onion to have. This onion has traits that I don't have for its own environment. And so this is how things evolve differently from one another. Different populations work better in different environments, and that creates species over time. So I don't expect you to know everything that I'm saying. I'm expecting you to just like in class, to sort of hear the things that I'm saying and to try and make sense of them. And over time, it's going to make more and more sense. You just are going to have to check out the information here, watch videos on your own. You're going to have to explore the content a little bit more than you've had to on your own in the past, because this is new for us. You know, you're not forced to go to class and sort of, and I'm not forcing you to have conversations or engage in lab or anything at the same amount. So you're going to have to do a little bit more on your own now. But the nice thing is you sort of get to do it on your own time, and you get to do it as much as you need to. And I'm here to help. You know, you can always get in touch with me, and you know how. So let's check out some questions. So true or false, 1,000 years is a long time compared to the length of time that life has been evolving on Earth. Do you think it's a long period of time compared to life? Check out the reading, figure it out. Should be easy for you. I'll go on to the second question. Provide 2 reasons why there are about 8.7 million different species of life on Earth. So why is there so many species? I gave you those 2 reasons why there's so many different living things on Earth. Number 3, Earth is made of many different ecosystems. Identify the type of factors that determine if an ecosystem is a desert or a jungle. So I didn't tell you to explain why something is a desert or jungle. I just said to identify the type of factors that determine this. And so a lot of people started talking about jungles and deserts, but they didn't really answer the question. And that's, again, another reason why you got to highlight, right? Identify the type of factors. So I'm only looking for abiotic or biotic. Figure it out. Check out the reading. Number 4 for this question. This is a big one that's going to lead us into like the next set of readings, okay? So you're a biologist and you're studying a river ecosystem. So in your head, you're imagining a river. One day, a group of 50 penguins come in. So all these penguins come in to this river ecosystem. After 5 years and 3 penguin generations, that means penguins have lived and died 3 times. They've made new penguin babies 3 times. They have 3 generations, right? So now we're at like the grandchildren penguins. There's only 10 penguins left. There were 50 and the population has decreased. So that means we've had a bunch of death happen, right? And not a lot of survival, but we've had some penguins survive. There's 10 left over. And then I highlighted this for you. The 10 remaining penguins have darker feathers and shorter beaks than the penguins from the original population 5 years ago. So these remaining penguins have darker feathers and shorter beaks. So all the ones that had lighter feathers and longer beaks, what do you think happened to them? Did they survive? Did they pass down their genes to the next generation? It sounds like those ones died off. It sounds like only the penguins that were shorter, had shorter beaks, not just shorter, but had shorter beaks, right? And that had darker colorations, those ones were more successful. Maybe they could blend in more and they didn't get eaten by, I don't know, alligators or something. So these are the ones that survived. And then here's the question, right? So if you observed and recorded information for another 5 years, what do you predict you would observe, right? So what's your prediction if you're going to observe these penguins, right, for another 5 years? So what's the trend so far? So far, we keep losing the light-colored penguins, and the dark-colored ones are surviving. And it seems to be a benefit for these penguins to have shorter beaks. So in another 5 years, what do you think is going to happen? I'll leave it up to you. I want to hear what you think. Okay, let's keep rocking. So which species are our closest relatives? All right. So I give you a bunch of pictures here. So this one, what percentage of your genes do you share? And I'm looking at these pictures and I'm thinking like, all right, I know that I'm closer to a chimpanzee than a mouse. But check out the mouse. The mouse looks like nothing like a human. But the mouse and the human share 92% of the genes. That's a lot of similarities, right? More than I thought. A fruit fly, a tiny fly that annoys you in your house or in your apartment. They like, they're actually usually around fruit, when the fruit's been sitting out too long, there's all these flies around it. A fruit fly, 44% of you in a fruit fly is like 44% of your genes are the same. And your genes are determining what traits you have. So that's kind of crazy too. That's a lot of similarities. A yeast, 26%. So there's all these similarities that we've got, right? And this little caption tells us what we're looking at here, right? So each of the images provide data about similarities in genes between humans and other species on Earth. Now, it's okay if you don't know what genes are. We haven't really talked about that a lot, but it's going to be important for you to become more familiar with it. And I do want you to know that genes, we're going to sort of talk about them just like DNA, because genes are like the most important parts of your DNA, okay? So genes are the most important parts of your DNA. So if you're sharing a lot of similarities in genes with something, then you're sharing a lot of similarities in your DNA with that thing, okay? All right, so let's check this out, right? So we're going to use all these pictures and tables, right, to sort of show how we're connected to these other species, right? And then I have this image here, and I messed with this image to make it a little bit easier to understand. This is called a cladogram, or some people call it a cladogram. I've always called it a cladogram. It doesn't really matter how you call it. So cladograms are diagrams, and they help show relatedness by placing those that are closely related on branches that are close to each other. So that should make sense, that if two things are closely related, like prosimians and humans are pretty closely related on this little branch. They are closer than birds are to humans, right? Prosimians and humans are closer than birds and humans. And so we're showing that we're more related. And then these things, these bottom pieces, everything that's above this little characteristic here, all of the organisms have that in common. So for four-chambered hearts, a bird, all birds, and all prosimians and all humans, they all have a four-chambered heart. And so because they all share that, we put four-chambered hearts here because that's where they evolved. Four-chambered hearts evolved at this point in the evolution of species in the world. And then there's a common ancestor at this point to all of these things. That common ancestor, how many chambers in its heart did it have? It had 4, right? And all birds and all prosimians and all humans, we share that common ancestor. We share that trait. So I sort of gave an example of this stuff, so I'm not going to read these things. Let's just go down to the question. These questions, it seemed like you struggled with a little bit more. And part of this is just because, you know, this is my first stab at sort of building this stuff. So don't feel bad if I'm giving you a bunch of comments here. So I say complete the chart by adding the animals below in the correct order. So this is what we're going to highlight here. And here's your organisms below. So owls, roundworms, sharks, chimpanzees, fruit flies. And so we can sort of look up here. What I'm going to do is change the zoom. We'll change the zoom so that way we can look at these things sort of at the same time. So owls, where do we sort of find owls here, right? And where do we find, right, and roundworms, like worms, where would they sort of be found here? And then sharks and chimpanzees and fruit flies. So we know fruit fly is sort of down here, but it looks like fruit fly, right, is, these are the percentages they share with humans, right? Chimpanzee is really, really, really similar to humans. So a roundworm here, it looks like it's below fruit fly. And then we have our birds, and then we have our mammals like mice and dogs and things like that. So where do these things fit here? Well, for least related, so over here, you should have roundworms. That should be the thing that shares the least, right? Because fruit flies is going to come, looks like it's going to come next, right? Fruit flies will come next, so that would be in this sort of yellowy area. And then I'll leave you to do the rest of these, right? Owls and sharks and chimpanzees. You should be able to figure out sort of the order of those. And remember the red is the one that's most related and the white is the one that's least related. Okay, I tried to sort of have a nice gradient here. Okay, question 2 says, based on the cladogram, zoom in a little bit more again. It says, based on the cladogram, the bottom on page 3, list the 4 animal groups that all share the common trait of having 4 limbs. So here's the cladogram, right? And here's 4 limbs. So remember, it says, right, everything that's above it are the things that share that trait, right? So all of these things share the trait of animal cells. And so that means insects and fish and amphibians, they all have animal cells, right? They're all part of the animal kingdom. But insects don't have limbs, right? They don't have like arms and legs. That's what limbs are. Fish don't have limbs, they have fins. But amphibians, they have 4 limbs, right? If you sort of like went down and sort of like, you know, this is you standing up, now here's you laying down, you'd sort of look like a reptile or an amphibian. You have 4 legs and it has 4 legs. A bird, I know it uses wings to fly, but those are limbs. It's got the wings as its upper limbs and it's got its legs as its lower limbs. And so we share this 4-limb characteristic with amphibians, birds, prosimians, and humans. So all 4 of those sort of creature types share that trait. So that's what you're going to throw in there. And then for these last bits, right, humans and chimpanzees, sorry, I think it's got a little screwy here. So humans and chimpanzees, right, they share a lot of similar proteins, and that means we share a lot of similar traits. So I just ask you to sort of throw in some similar traits that you have with chimpanzees to sort of get you to understand that, to start to think of like, all right, what do I, you know, think about what a chimpanzee looks like. What do we really have in common, you know? And then the same thing for a fish. I know you don't think you have a lot in common with a fish, but you both have 2 eyes and a brain, right? And you both have a mouth and a stomach and a spinal cord and a backbone to protect the spinal cord and tons more organs on the inside do you share with a fish. And this is really good evidence that we have common ancestors, that we share so much because our ancestors 370 million years ago were the same things. This is way before there were any mammals, way before there were anything walking on land. This is before all that. Okay. So hopefully I can quickly manipulate this page so that way I can give you the story time relatively easily. Don't like how much that changes, but this is the best way that I've been able to figure out how to give you information. So bear with me a second. And hopefully I can format this so that way it doesn't look insane. Okay. All right. So let's hope that this works. My computer is moving slow. I'm going to buy another one soon because I can't handle this anymore. All right. So story time. There's this guy, Charles Darwin. That's his name. He was born in like the 1800s. It's a long time ago. And he came up with the idea of how living things change over time. And I don't mean like change over their lifetime. I mean how living things have changed throughout the whole history of the earth. Okay, he figured this idea out called natural selection. It has been called the best idea that anybody has ever had, which is why I threw that in there as the title. And people that are really, really, really smart are saying that because it was really, really, really a good idea. It really made sense, and it continues to make sense with all the evidence that we find, which is why it became a scientific theory. We talked about that. Nobody's been able to prove it wrong. It works with all the evidence, even that we find today, even with all the species that we're doing experiments on and all the species that we're just gathering information on, okay? So in 1831, this is what happened with this guy, Charles Darwin. He was offered a job to sail around the world. He was young and he was really curious about the Earth's living things. He collected lots of stuff even before he went on this voyage. And the voyage took him 5 years. He went on to just sort of hang out and be with this other guy who was the captain of the ship. The captain wanted somebody to talk to who was educated and who had sort of the same type of mindset. And so that's why he brought Charles Darwin on. So during that time, Darwin gathered all these species. He gathered living things and non-living things, and it gave him this experience to put together a hypothesis about how life changes over time and why there are so many different species on the Earth. And really, for 100 years, Darwin's hypothesis, which is now called the theory of evolution by natural selection, has been taught in every single high school, in every college biology class. So no scientist has been able to prove this wrong, and his idea made him super famous, right? So what did he actually observe? He saw that in Africa, when he sailed to Africa, he noticed that there were shells sticking up, way up in this cliff face. And then he thought like, oh man, how is there a sea all the way up there? Like, what's going on in the Earth? Is the Earth pushing stuff around? Like, has the Earth changed way more than I think it's changed over the course of the Earth's history? So the Earth must be way older than most people think, because up until this point, they didn't think it was that old. In Argentina, he even found another layer of shells in a cliff face, but this time there was fossils underneath that of a giant sloth. And so then he thought, wow, that giant sloth had to have existed, and then it had to have died. And then this sea had to come about this area, because the giant sloth didn't live in the sea, right? Then a big sea came in and existed there, and then it dried up. And I'm seeing the evidence of all that, and then he's thinking, wow, the Earth is really, really, really old. Even older than I once thought, back when I was looking at Africa. And then his big ideas came from this place called the Galapagos Islands. Darwin observed that the big ideas came from looking at tortoises, from observing tortoises, and then observing birds called finches. Okay. When he looked at the tortoises, he noticed that there were some differences in the type of tortoise. And this picture here should kind of show you. You have this tortoise here, and this tortoise can't really lift its head very high. And then you have this tortoise here that can lift its head a little bit, and then this tortoise here that can lift its head a lot. It's got this long neck. And this is an example of how evolution has sort of affected these tortoise species. The tortoises that couldn't lift their heads up, those tortoises, they existed in the areas on the islands where the plants were much closer to the ground. Because if the plants that they eat were higher up, those tortoises couldn't get any of the food, so they would have actually died. And they did. So you don't find any of these tortoises, the tortoises that can't pick their head up, you don't find any of them on the islands, or Darwin didn't find any of them on the islands that had higher vegetation, that had higher plants, because those tortoises just ended up dying out. And then you have these tortoises with that can lift their necks up. They survived obviously much better in the areas on the islands that had even the taller plants. And so because they survived better, they reproduced more, and eventually you only would have gotten those turtles on those islands. And that's what Darwin saw, was that there were only the turtles that could lift their heads up high on the islands with the higher plant foods, okay? And sort of the same thing happened when you go down to the next page there with these finches. Now, finches are birds, and Darwin thought that when he collected all these birds, he thought that he had found all these different types of birds. And then when he took it back to England, the bird scientist that he took it to, called an ornithologist. When he took it to an ornithologist, the ornithologist said, "You have all the same type of bird, but it's just different species of that same type of bird. They were all finches." And Darwin was sort of blown away by this, thinking, how are they so different, but also so common at the same time? How are they sort of the same type of bird when their beaks all look so different? And that has, just like the tortoises, that has everything to do with the environment that the birds were surviving in. On some islands, there were more insects, and so the birds that could survive had these little beaks to dart and grab the insects. And other places had better like little sticks they could use for tools, and so their beaks were those that survived there. They could use their tools more. The beaks that are like big honking beaks, you know, those ones, they're built to sort of crush seeds. So the birds that survived in those areas were the ones that had larger beaks that could crush seeds. And so if you have an island with lots of seeds on it, and you have birds with these teeny little beaks that can't crush the seeds, those birds are going to die. They're not going to survive. And only the ones with the big beaks are going to be able to survive and pass down their genes, pass down the traits for big beaks. So Darwin noticed this on his voyage, or on the voyage that he went on, right? He spent 20 years collecting information and reading other scientists' work. And then after 20 years of putting all this information together, he told his world his big hypothesis, and he published a book, okay? And here's his big ideas. So here's the 1, 2, and 3, okay? So number 1, only members of each species that are best fit for the environment will survive and reproduce. And this is called survival of the fittest. So only the members that are best fit for the environment are going to be able to reproduce. And so this means, I'm on to number 2 now. This means that only some members of the species are going to pass down their traits to the next generation, to the babies. So if you have a bunch of birds and only the ones with the big beaks are surviving, the little beak ones aren't getting enough food, that means only the ones with the big beaks are going to reproduce in the next generation. The babies of these birds are almost all going to have big beaks because they got their traits from mom and dad. They got their traits from their parents, and only the moms and dads with big beaks were the ones that survived. And the last bit of this is that Darwin figured out that the Earth is really old, right? Or at least he used other people's other ideas, and he saw this fossil evidence, and he found that the Earth is super old. And so he said, wow, this is a process of, you know, certain things living and certain things dying, and the ones that are surviving, passing on their traits. This has been happening for so long that the Earth has allowed all this time and different environments, right? Going back to page 2, all of this allows for many, many millions of species to exist on the Earth, okay? Sorry, there's just the sun is like coming in and sort of blinding me. So we'll turn this a little bit, slide over. Okay, so we're finishing up here, promise. Okay, so I'll read this last bit, and then we're gonna go into the questions, and then I'm done. I know this has been going on for a little bit. So doesn't this make sense, right? So imagine a population of cheetahs. Some are faster than others. Will the slow cheetahs survive? No. All of the slow ones are not fit enough They die off. They can't get any food, and they can't get any food for their little cheetah pups, right? Their cheetah babies. So all of those organisms are going to die off. Only the fast ones that can catch food and feed their children are going to be able to survive and reproduce. And so the next generation, because all the slow cheetahs died, the next generation of cheetahs should be fast. Only fast, right? And then as that keeps going, even though all the cheetahs are fast, there's still some slower cheetahs of the fast ones. And so those ones die off. And this process keeps happening. Nature keeps selecting some of the organisms to die that don't have the best traits, and some of the organisms to survive that do have better traits. And we call that survival of the fittest. Only those that have the most fit traits survive to pass on their genes. Okay? So what made Charles Darwin famous, right? Explain why it was important, right? So you got two things. What made him famous? That's the first thing you highlight. And the second thing was to sort of explain why it was important for Darwin to collect these species and make these observations, okay? So you got two things to answer that. And hopefully my story helps, I hope. Number two, explain survival of the fittest in your own words. Maybe go back a little bit, rewind it, and you can use me to sort of help you to think about this, but break it down. Surviving and fittest. Only the fittest survive. And you should be able to tell what I meant by fittest. It depends on your environment. Number three, on the Galapagos Islands, Darwin observed tortoises. He noticed that specific tortoise species were more common on different islands. A long time ago, each island probably had a lot of different tortoises, right? Long necks and short necks. Based on what you read about evolution, what happened to most of the tortoises over time? Did all of them survive? Why or why not? And then the same thing for birds, right? He found, for question number 4, right? He found that certain finches with pointed beaks were more common on some islands, and other finches with larger crushing beaks were more common on other islands. So why do you and Darwin believe those birds were more successful on the islands where they live? So why are some birds more successful on island 1 and some birds are more successful on island 2? It depends. It all depends on your environment. So explain that, talk about their food, okay? So that's it. That's going through. Pages 5 through 8 are due next week, and I'll post another video for that. Sorry if this was super duper long. I'm gonna try and get better with that. But I do hope that it was helpful. I'm gonna flop it back. So I do hope that it was helpful. I do hope that that you're able to get something from this. And please, please, please give me some feedback. Let me know if I am just giving too much information or if I'm talking too fast, although you can rewind it. Give me some feedback so I know how to make this better, okay? See you around.